Vicky Herrington, Janila Ferrara, thank you for having this conversation with me about understanding innovation in public sector. And Vicky, there are many definitions of what is innovation in public sector. So could you please tell us how could we define innovation in public sector and why it is important for improving service delivery?
Thanks so much. And I'm also excited to be having this conversation. I think it doesn't matter whether you're talking about the private sector or you're talking about the public sector. When we're thinking about innovation, we're thinking about value, how we create value by bringing old and new ideas together to solve old and new problems. So when we're thinking about innovation in the public sector, what we're really thinking about is creating public value by bringing together old and new ideas to solve those sorts of problems in our world that require an institutional response. And in that way, I think innovation is intimately tied to institutional evolution, because as the things that create public value evolve, so must our organizations evolve their capabilities to be able to deliver that public value.
Jenny, would you like to add to anything what Vicky just said?
Well, in recent years, particularly since the pandemic, public sector innovation has become a leitmotif, not only in our region, but more broadly in the European Union also, both because of the general need to improve competitiveness and of important part that the public sector represents in our economy, but also because the public administrations are faced with problems of a complexity, of an interrelated complexity that they've never seen before. And therefore, the usual administrative structures are not the best apted sometimes to consider a large amount of data, take complex decisions, very often in a quickly changing environment. More agile forms of data-based decision-making are needed, better support for it, and of course, a more agile approach to solutions. The fact is also that citizens see all this, see the difficulties of the administration, and this is affecting public trust. So our public sector, in order to regain trust, has to equip itself with new ways of doing things that are apt to these new challenges. And this is where public innovation is kicking in.
Thank you. And you know, there seems to be a bit of paradoxical situation, because the purpose why we have public sector organizations is to provide structure, and also there is a hierarchy. So Vicky, how can public sector officials foster innovation in the settings that is sometimes very hierarchical and structured?
So when we're thinking about what makes innovation happen, we're thinking oftentimes about creating space for new ideas to come together, and then time to be able to tinker with those new ideas in order to for new ways of delivering services to emerge. So actually we have a really important role for leaders in that, in creating in some ways those architectures that enable an organization to carve sufficient time and space for those ideas to come together. They also, of course, require motivated people. So we also need to think very closely about what the incentives and the reward systems are that operate in our organization. But when we think about those organizations that are effective at innovation, that what we might describe as have a culture of innovation, then they are those organizations that, again, enable people to come together, tinker with ideas, and feel motivated and rewarded to doing that. So when we're thinking about trying to create those same sort of settings in the public sector, which, as you say, is very hierarchical, oftentimes very bureaucratic, it's not as simple as being able to say we will create a culture of innovation and expecting the magic to happen. What we absolutely need to do is recognize that you don't change culture by changing culture. You change culture by changing the components, the structures, the processes, the systems we have in our organizations, and then culture becomes an emergent property. So to go back to the point I said earlier, when we reflect on what makes an innovative organisation, we need to reflect on the systems, the structures, the processes that allow us or don't allow us to create the time and space for new ideas to come together. And then the motivation and reward systems to be able to tinker with those ideas to come up with new ways of operating.
Thank you, Vicky. And Johnny, going to the Western Balkan region, what would you say are some of the most pressing obstacles faced by public institutions in the region regarding innovation?
I wouldn't focus on the word obstacle that much, because in reality, particularly in the last 5 years, there is a lot of innovation going on in the public sector of the Western Balkan countries. Sometimes, maybe even too much enthusiasm for it, in the sense that innovation, and particularly digitalization within it, is coming to be seen as a tool to leapfrog some limitations that the administration is encountering, not only in dealing with exceptional challenges, but also day-to-day business. So paradoxically, the big challenges do not concern particular types of capacity that we would consider as very modern. I would say that the main weak point right now is gaining the trust of stakeholders outside the administration, of users. There isn't a practice of co-design very often, and of early involvement of users in the design of services. And this is affecting the result of much of the innovation that is carried out. Also, within the organization, there is very often a very top-down hierarchical structure that does not facilitate the creation of a culture of innovation based on initiatives from the grassroots level, from below, from the front office in the organization. And then thirdly, I would say that a punishing element is the size of our countries and the lack of a strong entrepreneurial ecosystem outside the public administration. Our ICT sectors are small. And even if very often the public sector produces up to a quarter of the contracts within the ICT sector of a country, in reality that ends up limited to very few contractors, and so there is a limited variety of inputs. On the most technological side, I would say that yes, we have limitations concerning infrastructure. The penetration of broadband is obviously a case in point. But most countries realize that and they work on it. An aspect on which they work less, and it's going to become more and more important as they are moving from traditional digital transformation to the use of AI, is data. We started working on open data, but the quality of the data sets is very, very low, and the amount of work that is needed to clean them up and make them usable is often a forbidding point to the introduction of AI-based applications.
And now, from zooming out from the region, Vicky, you mentioned before already the role of the leaders. So what is the role of the leaders when driving innovation in the public service delivery?
Of course, the role of leadership is absolutely vital when we're thinking about innovation and we're thinking about creating innovation at all levels of the organisation, whether that's at the grassroots level or whether those are large enterprise level innovative service delivery options. I think the role of leadership really, I think that it kind of covers three different spheres of influence, or they have the opportunity for three different spheres of influence. First of all, of course, they create the architectures of our organisation. They have their hands on the levers of the reward systems that motivate or otherwise individuals to want to try something new, want to take an appropriate risk, to do something more than the tried and tested ways of doing things. And, you know, many of us can look in our own institutional organisations and our institutional bureaucracies and think there's not much at the moment that rewards popping one head above the parapet or taking those sorts of risks. We are incentivised really to carry on doing the things that we've done for a very long time. So there's a really important role for leaders in creating the mechanisms that can drive the sort of innovative behaviour. So they create the architecture. They also have the capacity to create the teams that enable the innovation to happen. We spoke earlier about, what does a culture of innovation look like? Well, in many ways, some organizations have circumvented the challenge of creating a culture of innovation across the organization by creating innovation teams or innovation labs, which sit off to one side of the organization and can then do their work under different settings. So they don't have the same sort of low risk appetite settings that the bulk of the organization would have. The role of leadership is not just creating those teams, but also then brokering the transfer of any successful innovation back into business as usual. And so for me, that's the second role of innovation, that of innovation leaders. They are brokers really of the resources and also the innovations back into the organization. And I think the third role for leadership in our organizations is the vision and the storytelling about innovation. What is the story we tell ourselves about our organization and its ability to do new things, create new public value? And leaders have an incredible platform to be able to do that work and to be able to say, this is a new story that we're telling ourselves about the work and the value that we're creating for the public.
Thank you. And zooming back in the region of Western Balkans, Gianni, can you share some concrete success stories that demonstrate practical innovation in the public sector delivery?
Well, there is a vast amount of them. Some more relative successes than others, some more encouraging. I would say, let's start from the broader one. All countries in the region have by now progressed to adopt online portals for digital services, built by international good practice on a live event basis. And two of the most advanced, I would say, show well the different trends. For instance, in Serbia, the Serb one has a very large amount of services of very high quality, picking up at fast rates. But its strong point is the technology. Very solid infrastructure, very strong interoperability among the basic registers that allows new services to be introduced quite effectively. And even when you come to the work done on digital divide and, people that have difficulties in accessing the new services digitally, the emphasis is on expanding infrastructure, expanding the broadband financing devices for people that have no access. On the other side, a bit of a later starter, but coming up very strong, Albania had previously a strategy in service delivery that was based on physical one-stop shops. And then during the COVID period, this strategy was set aside, and they, in a very short time, adopted the digital by default principle and started moving the population to digital services. Their emphasis, however, is different, is not on technology. They didn't have the groundwork done, and was instead of involvement of customers. Also because they had a general co-governance platform, an online tool with which they had already started doing a bit of participatory design. And so there you see more involvement on the design of the services by the users, but a slower pickup rate, even if now over 90% of the services are said to be online, the quality of some of them is still not up to the mark of the best. And there is an approach also to the digital divide that is a little bit different. They're planning to do omni centers in which people that have difficulties using the technology will be helped and receive hands-on training on digital literacy. So much more on the side of the human than on the side of the infrastructure. Of course, Albania, like all other countries of the region, is also trying to increase the rate of penetration of connectivity, of broadband connectivity. So some people take it more from the technology side, some people more from the user side, and in reality, these weaknesses compensate, but everybody knows where the work is needed.
Thank you very much for this conversation.
Thanks to you.